And Michael is also the current director at Effective Altruism Australia.
Yeah, which is, I guess, the hat that I'm wearing today. And so with that sort of lens on, I guess the three of us represent kind of three of the organisations thinking about like effective giving in Australia a lot. And so I just really wanted to start by opening up to you guys. Like, what do you think the sort of current state is of effective giving in Australia? Yeah.
Well, I can just talk to the state of giving generally in Australia, and by global standards, that is extremely poor. If you look at what we give as a country as a percentage of GDP, we're looking at about 0.8% of GDP. If you compare that to our neighbour New Zealand, they give about 1.8% in donations as a percentage of GDP. So which, you know, to put that into dollar terms, we give about $13 billion. For us to be the equivalent of New Zealand, we need to increase giving here in Australia annually by $17 billion. So I just say that, effective or not, we're actually just not giving a lot.
So they're doubling us in the more than doubling.
And more, yeah.
In terms of the effective giving side of things, we're seeing like continued growth in effective giving, even as giving in general has been on a decline. Especially this year has been tough for a lot of the philanthropic sector, especially in light of financial markets and kind of economic pressures. But yes, at least the effectiveness side of things is going up. But yeah, giving is a bit of a tough time at the moment.
Okay, so you're seeing that because of the financial pressures and the economic conditions, people aren't maybe giving as much, but people are still slowly trickling into sort of effective giving, did you say?
Yeah, so effective giving is growing as a share of the pie, and so overall effective giving has been growing despite the otherwise declining trends. This year the decline has been amplified due to the current economic conditions, and last year was just a huge kind of year because there was a big spike in things like the financial markets. There's a lot of money also in stimulus, but there's been like a decades-long decline in giving.
The Life You Can Save's annual report will be published next month. It'll actually show year-on-year growth in terms of the money we've moved to charities, so quite a significant proportion. And I guess we'll wait and see what happens this year. You know, markets might recover, but certainly there's growth in the effective giving space, which is really, really welcome.
Right. So effective giving is growing, even if giving as a whole may not be, and the effective altruism community is kind of growing, which is part of that. And one of the ways that we've been growing is sort of thinking about bigger cause areas than, say, just global health and development. And so for people who are interested in, say, like existential risk or animal welfare, like what sort of options are there for people who have like as part of the community growing too?
Yeah, well, Australia is an interesting one with our tax deductibility for different cause areas. It's really, really hard to get charity registered as a DGR tax-deductible charity in Australia. It has a very narrow conception of what charity is compared to most other nations. Animals, in particular, you're only able to donate tax effectively if you're doing something which is like helping an animal, like in a shelter or a rescue or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. So only charities that are doing direct care for animals that are lost or sick or need rehoming, etc., are eligible for DGR. But animal advocacy organisations and charities such as Animals Australia or Voiceless or the new Australian Alliance for Animals, none of those organisations are eligible for tax-deductible gifts.
Yeah, that being said, a lot of money is constrained by DGR giving, like we were talking earlier, and we might get to that, around certain vehicles which can be used to give. Say, if someone's put money away with the intention of giving it later through a donor advised fund or whatever the equivalent of PAF in Australia.
Yeah, a private ancillary fund.
And also corporations often have like a certain amount they can give, but it has to be DGR. But individuals in Australia can give to all sorts of things, whether it's tax deductible or not. You can't give as much or don't get as much of a benefit financially, but many people in Australia do give to organisations working here or abroad on these other cause areas.
Right, so you're saying that because the charity rules are so restrictive about what can and cannot get DGR status, that there are a narrow set of options for animal welfare. As far as like long-termism and X-risk goes, like it's pretty short. You're saying a lot of people just maybe don't worry about the DGR. Do you want to talk a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so some people don't have an option, like some corporations, or if your money's locked up and it has to go to DGR for legal reasons. But if you think that an organisation is 5 or 10 times more effective, then the difference between a tax deduction shouldn't matter to you that much as just a small everyday donor.
Yeah, absolutely. But we know that, in general, it does. For a lot of people, a tax deduction is, critical and key in their decision making. It's not necessarily rational, but that is the way that some people will make their choices. But if you look at money that's locked up in the private ancillary funds in Australia, there's about $7 billion sitting there, and they have to, when they grant money, has to go to a charity that's got DGR. But the good news is that the newly elected Labor government, they made a commitment ahead of the election to double philanthropic giving by 2030, and they're working with organisations like the Life You Can Save, Philanthropy Australia and others in the sector to come up with ways in which giving in general can be increased in Australia, and some of the mechanisms by which that could be done. So the new Assistant Minister for Treasury, Charities and Competition, Andrew Lee, who some of you saw speak on Friday night, he is obviously very EA aligned, and he is open to the idea, I believe, of opening the door and reviewing the Tax Act, I guess, and what that definition of DGR is, and organisations that might be able to get tax deductible status in the future, which could unlock a lot of funding for not just animal organisations like Voiceless Animals Australia, the Animals Alliance, but also other advocacy organisations. But, for anyone who's not aware already, just with my Animal Justice Party hat on, you can donate to the Animal Justice Party to help fund our work. $1,500 per year as an individual can be donated to the Animal Justice Party and get a tax deduction for that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Glad you mentioned that. Yeah. So Luke's, you're saying that, well, if you think that the long-term future fund would be twice as effective as something else, then you probably rationally should just do that thing, right? And Louise, you're sort of saying, well, in reality, we all kind of have, we all are, pulled by that, impulse to get a tax deduction. You're saying there might be some new options there.
Yeah. Contact your local member. Seriously. Let them know that this is something you care about.
Yeah, I think we can't expect that kind of change that we're hoping for will happen anytime soon. And I think all of us in this room are aware that, there are people in, certainly in the global health space that could, do with interventions, and there are lots of organisations, effective charities. The Life You Can Save's got about 20-odd charities we recommend. There are people that have got needs right now today that could use your money and Australians' money that will, make a difference to their lives. So I think that, going to, just expanding on that as well, just going to that concept of patient philanthropy, maybe there's other opportunities that might come up in the future that will be more effective than what's around today. Just keep in mind that there are practical things that can be done today. That's my view. If you really do think that there is, maybe something around the corner that's going to be better for you and what you care about, then, consider taking a portfolio approach and donating some now and keeping some aside for those opportunities in the future.
Yeah, do you want to just elaborate that on the best way to do that? Because we mentioned PAF a couple of times ago. I don't think that was relatively new to me. So if I was someone who wanted to invest some of my money towards donating it in the future, there are ways of getting the tax deductible benefit now. Do you want to explain that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So there are some services that make that kind of structure accessible. So there's Australian Philanthropic Services, the Australian Communities Foundation. They've got public ancillary funds in which you can set up your own named fund, which is essentially a sub-fund that sits underneath that. And you can put money into that and get a tax deduction for that initial amount. Might be, say, $10,000. It sits there. They've got an investment manager that manages that money so that it gets returns and, it's building in size. But part of the deal is that you have to grant about 4% a year at a minimum to a charity that has got DGR status. So that's a way to say, hey, you know what, I've got some money, don't know what's around the corner, but I know that, I want to give now and, put it aside. And so that's a really good way to do it. And it's, all the administration and the other compliance obligations that come with that are taken care of by these organisations.
Yeah. That being said, even at the moment, as a community, the effective altruism community isn't spending down most capital at a rate that would be ideal, even by kind of Phil Trammell's patient philanthropy arguments. That being said, it might be slightly different in the last 6 months, given the size of the pot has changed with the values of things that are in stocks or crypto.
Yeah.
But as an individual, I think that there is, as I said before, just so much opportunity to do good right now. Especially, GiveWell just put out an announcement, which has been coming for a while, about they're very sure that they're not going to get anywhere near meeting the fundraising targets that they have for just their top charities this year, knowing that there will be a funding gap there. They won't be able to spend that money at even a reduced cost effectiveness. So even things that are roughly 8 times as cost effective as cash, like bed nets and stuff like that, they're not going to be able to fully fund. And so there is still this very big opportunity for people, even with just a very narrow definition, let alone all of the other things that someone could fund right now.
Okay, so you're saying that even with FTX and with OpenPhil, GiveWell are not able to fully fund even their top charities. So there's urgent needs in the global health space right now.
Yeah, and if you can find this conversation on Twitter, but Dustin Moskovitz was recently saying they would spend down potentially faster if they saw more funders coming into the field. But at the moment, they see that they have funding commitments that they want to be able to fulfill over the next 10, 20 years while they spend down their capital. If they're not seeing enough new funders come in and enough individual donors as well increasing their giving, they're worried that the programs that they're currently supporting won't be supported for long enough.
Okay. And then to loop back to what you were saying, Louise, if I'm a donor that's really committed to climate change, and I know there are a couple of options now on the Life You Can Save that are targeting climate change. But to give a bit of an EAA plug, we're trying to set up a EAA environment, which is where we can donate to
submissions in. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, and so if someone right now wanted to put some money away so that they could put towards international and climate change charities next year, they could put it in a public ancillary fund, still get the DGR status, and then start rolling it out later.
Yeah, that's right. You can set up a fund with whatever you've got. A minimum, I think the minimum's $2,000. So relatively small amounts, giving that 4% away. You get the tax deduction today for that $2,000 and drip feed it through, and then you can add money to that sub-fund or named fund over time as well, while you're waiting for the more climate charities to become available. Because right now there's really 3 that we recommend at the Life You Can Save that are based here in Australia that have got DGR status, but there are others like Clean Air Task Force that we recommend in the US that's not accessible to Australian donors at the moment. Well, if the tax deduction is critical to you.
So get the ACNC to process that paperwork, and then we'll be good.
What was your line? Write to the local member again, Luke?
Write to your local member.
And I guess the final thing that we're trying to do at EAA, which is a bit of a pivot that people could also support, is if you do care about long-termism, one of the key things we're trying to do is just grow the size of this community, right? And so as EAA, we are trying to play more of a role in that, getting people on board to be community managers, community builders, and things like that, which is another option for trying to still target the causes that, if you are focused on something like Exodus, that does have a sort of slightly indirect, but theory of change behind that.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's still all talking about things that individual donors can do. How do you feel about the best arguments for and against an individual in the room donating towards effective charities in a world where there are $80 billion of funding hanging around?
Yeah. So a note on the funding situation is at the moment we have more money than we did 5 years ago as a community, and that means we have the ability to do some experimentation, because the world's we had that and we now have this, and the world's problems are like this. That means we have some money to do experimentation, and it also means that we don't want money to be the reason that people don't do things like come to these conferences, because we see that the value of what we've seen historically, the value of people coming to conferences or people changing their careers and stuff like that can be quite high. Even at finding new money, like people like Sam and FTX, that exists because of this kind of community building stuff. So we don't want money to be a barrier to people being ambitious, but there is still so much more that needs to be done than we have the funds to do so. And so if you're considering, should I pursue a higher earning career, or should I do something which I have a really clear understanding that I could have this additional value as my career, in your particular circumstance, if you think you could have a much bigger value with your career and earn a bit less, then go do that. But many people can still contribute whilst pursuing an impactful career, and many people can contribute who aren't necessarily trying to have an impact through their career at that time, or they're building career capital.
So you're saying there's still a space for earning to give when there's a good personal fit for that person, and if they're are going to be bringing a substantial amount of income, but there's more flexibility now for that person to take like a cut in the salary if they feel like they're going to need some support to take a risk to pivot their career, that sort of thing.
But also too, like just because someone could save 10,000 lives per year and you could only save one with your current donation budget, doesn't mean that you're not saving that life. Like that's still a really meaningful thing to do with the money that you do choose to give.
Yeah, that just because there's 1,000 people that are, that's still that. And I think like psychologically, with my psychologist hat on, like that personally I found like a huge part of my identity as being an EA has been the donations that I've made, and it sort of helps cement that. And I think a lot of people feel that. And that there's been psych research showing that the benefit you get from spending $4,000 on a couch just attenuates very quickly. Like you just get so used to it, but that the psychological well-being benefits that come from giving don't attenuate in the same way. So, I mean, I know that like you shouldn't be focusing on how it makes me feel. We should be focusing on how it improves the world. But
I think that uncovering and acknowledging donor motivations and behaviour and locking into that, because I feel the same way. When I give my end of financial year donation, like I feel so good. Like it makes me feel amazing. and other donors report the same. So the donors that I've been speaking to in my role, which I've been in for 2 months, they all really look forward to making that decision and donating.
And you've got skin in the game with things that you care about, and that to me is like really important. And I think it actually touches on some of the questions around giving to more than one cause area. I know that like from some expected value perspective, if you're kind of weighing up how much time you're going to spend researching something, you might say, look, put all of your eggs in one basket with a donation decision. Personally, I have some kind of internal worldview diversification where I allocate a certain amount of money based on how likely I think a worldview is to be true. Even having just a very small amount of money in certain things means that like I have skin in the game. I'm able to talk to people about that cause as someone who actually has skin in the game, and who is actually putting my money where my mouth is.
Yeah, so for I don't know if people in the room are aware, but the Life You Can Save has got some essentially kind of like managed funds, which, is the equivalent of, instead of going to a stockbroker who designs a portfolio for you, you go to a fund manager and say, hey, manage my money for me. We've got like an all charities fund where people can donate to all of our recommended charities and in equal proportion, or a 90-10 fund. And we've got other funds that are coming, so keep an eye on our website. And for me, I like that approach because it feels like diversifying my giving portfolio, skinning the game across, a range of causes. And for me, it just simplifies the decision. And I know because I trust the research the Life You Can Save does and its process, and the Director of Research has got a very impressive CV. So I trust the fund manager, and it just makes it a really simple decision for me. So that's I highly recommend that.
Okay, so Luke, you were sort of saying you're an internal worldview diversification thing, and even though like maybe the rational arguments for like just researching one and kind of going all in, you like being able to donate proportional to your belief in each of those. But
even then, unless I'm sufficiently high context on something, I still prefer to use a fund for some extent for once I've made that initial decision of allocation of budget. Unless I have a really strong theory of change or like particular understanding of an area where I think I will outperform the fund manager for like my particular values. The other great thing about funds, and we've got this at Giving What We Can /EA Funds and at EAGxAustralia as well, is it enables you, and GiveWell's got the Maximum Impact Fund, like it enables the organisation who is managing the funds to respond quickly and also to update as new information changes, where as a donor, you're not always getting new information nearly as fast. So when things change, when the marginal dollar isn't going to be as effective, it can be harder to, for that information to make its way to you. Not everyone reads our newsletter, as much as that disappoints me.
So just a reminder, please submit your questions, and if they do pop up in the app, I'll make sure I pass it on to these guys, but please pop in anything that you wanted to ask. But just in the meantime, like, how do you, there's kind of two questions I think about communicating about sort of effective donation that I find tricky. One is, like you sort of mentioned, sometimes people might be donating to less effective charities, or like even things that are like, well down the list. How do you think about nudging people sort of up the list, or is that worth doing? And then, also then how do you talk about sort of the amount that you donate and the most effective way to do that without kind of coming across as sanctimonious to sort of your mud punter, if you know what I mean. So like I guess start with the first one. Like how do you, when you're talking to people who are already donating, or Louise, how do you help them choose between the top 20?
Yeah, okay, so keep in mind I've been in this role for 2 months now, but I have had conversations over the years since I read the book The Life You Can Save. Is for me, I frame it around the language that I understand and people in my community understand, or my networks understand, which is return on investment. And for those people that go, you donate to charity, how do you decide? And I said, well, did you know that there's actually research out there that can demonstrate the impact that your charitable donation dollar will have, and don't you want to get the biggest return on your investment dollar, like your charitable dollar? Make it stretch the furthest. And people kind of understand that. They go, oh wow, I've never really thought about it like that. So some people kind of go, yeah, I feel like I've got an obligation to give. I want to give to a charity, and they give to someone that they know, someone with a big brand, it might World Vision or whoever, cancer research. They're unaware. I guess the decision is based on fulfilling that obligation rather than going, hey, I could actually access analysis that's going to make sure that my donation impacts the most number of lives positively. So it's really that awareness piece, and just saying, if you do this for your investment, so why don't you do it for your donation dollar?
Yeah, on that, both with the effectiveness and how much to give, we also find that people sharing their personal experience and their reasons is much more effective than someone feeling like they're being lectured to or given a philosophical beating. So hearing like our members and donors share, here's why they care about effectiveness and why they trust the research, or why they're motivated to give more, why they feel like there's this huge opportunity, why they see the privilege that they have and that they want to share that. That is a lot more motivating for people to see that, people who are just like them have these motivations which are challenging, which are inspiring, and which are relying on things that they already do care about, like effectiveness and your return on investment, and like certainty or things like that.
And I just think it's not, I think that's probably something that we can all do, though, is somehow look for opportunities to have conversations with our networks about it. And it just, when it comes up, it doesn't have to be deliberate, because you don't want to be trying to, it needs to kind of come naturally, but like where there are opportunities to talk about giving, have those conversations, because then you can unpick why the people around you, why they do give, or, what motivates them, and, open up that door for the conversation around effectiveness. And certainly people in this that are giving and they're on this path already, they do understand the importance of talking about it, because it normalises it and all those things, and you can, kind of create a movement that way. And I just want to share a quick anecdote. I said this one this morning, but there's a donor that we have who gives a significant amount to our recommended charities, and he shares it with his colleagues, surgeon friends, etc., and says, I give this much, I give it to these charities, and they all remark to him, doesn't that make you feel good? And he goes, because he's very aware of his privilege and his circumstances, he goes, no, it doesn't make me feel good, it just makes me feel a bit less shit. So that's his motivation, is it just makes him feel a little bit better about his luck in life, and I kind of like that story too.
Yeah, any motivation will do at that point. But there are a couple of questions for the audience that weren't showing up a moment ago, and I'll focus on something sort of linked to what you just said, which is like, apart from us having more kind of conversations like that just with peers, like what can we do to create more of a culture of effective giving, or giving more generally in Australia, or why is our donation rate so much lower than the Kiwis across the ditch? Like how do we get more like that without just water cooler conversations?
I know it sounds really lame, but culture really does change one person at a time. Like, you have an effect on the people around you. Some people have a lot more people around them. So we found people with a large public audience have a big impact on the people who listen to them as well. So for us, people who are quite influential and people listen to them, that is one way of doing that. But at the end of the day, like, cultural change does happen one person at a time. It just is true. And we do things like advertising, things like quite persuasive things like reading an entire book with The Life You Can Save. Get it online, get your copy, give it away to friends, there's some here. But like, it can be really persuasive, but it's the fact that your friend gave the book to you means you're more likely to read it.
It is a challenge, and The Life You Can Save does invest a lot of resources into trying to build a culture of giving, so a lot of mass marketing and things, and we've found that ads from Peter Singer's Facebook account and his Twitter, from his Facebook, get really good engagement. And so we've been trying a number of things and working out where are we getting the most clicks, getting the most book downloads, etc. Because we are finding that the book does spread the message really well for those people that take the time to read it or listen to it on a podcast.
So, guys, consider that a call to arms. Have one more conversation this week about effective giving and giving the book to one extra person. But can we all thank Luke and Louise for...
Michael.